Gardner. I am the current chair of the K-12 and Pre-College Engineering Division for a few more hours. I'm excited about that transition coming up, although this is one of the highlights each year for me as division chair. Our K-12 committee is dedicated to finding someone who represents us and really speaks to the K-12 interest each year. So we have actually a subcommittee that focuses on finding and selecting and recruiting someone to be our distinguished lecturer nominee. And I was thrilled when my committee came back this year and had selected Dr. Karl Reid. I was even more excited when we asked him and he said yes. So it is a long-awaited privilege this morning to have him here. Our session, though, is sponsored by not just the K-12 and Pre-College Division, but also the Minorities in Engineering Division, the Women in Engineering Division, Community Engagement Division, and the Student Division as well. I'd like to welcome Stephanie Adams, Dr. Stephanie Adams from Virginia Tech to the podium here, and she's going to give us a wonderful introduction to Dr. Reid before we turn the floor over to him. Thank you for being here.
Stacey. I'm honored to introduce to you Karl Reid. I'll just plainly call him Karl, Dr. Reid. I'm a member of the National Advisory Board for the National Society of Black Engineers, and so Karl likes to say I'm his boss, but I'm really not. But I am honored that our executive director was chosen by the K-12 division to come and share some thoughts with you, the audience, this morning. As a member of the selection committee that chose Karl, we are very proud of the fact that Karl applied and came through the process and was selected to be our next executive director. He is a product of NSBE, which I think for us speaks volumes to the organization. We're a little over 40 years old. We were founded at Purdue. And I would just tell you a little bit about NSBE and then tell you a little bit about Karl so that makes some sense for you. The National Society of Black Engineers is an organization of over 31,000 members that is a student-run organization. It is the largest student-run organization in the country. Our current national president is an undergraduate student at City College of New York. So when we talk about it being student-led, it really truly is. And Karl was a national chairperson not too long ago. We won't date ourselves, but not too long ago, Karl was a national chairperson as a student. And so in our world, he's gone full circle. And one of the things that we were hopeful about, but certainly was not a requirement when we selected our next executive director, was that we felt that we had produced enough good citizens that we should finally be able to hire one of our own. And we found that in Dr. Karl W. Reid. Let me tell you a little about Karl. So Karl came to NSBE from the United Negro College Fund, where he oversaw new program development, research, and capacity building for the organization's 37 historically black colleges and universities, and held the title of Senior Vice President for Research, Innovation, and member college engagement. Before his service to UNCF, he worked in positions of progressive responsibility to increase diversity at his alma mater. Okay, now here's another one of the schools that puts the V in front of their title, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. That's the first for me. I'm really good with the Ohio State, but I've never heard the I thought if you just said MIT, that was enough. Anyway, so his alma mater of MIT, which he left as Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education and Director of the Office of Minority Education before going to UNCF. While working at MIT, Karl completed his Doctor of Education degree at Harvard. Geez, Harvard and MIT. Makes me feel really dumb. His dissertation explored the interrelationship of race, identity, and academic achievement. Karl was born in the Bronx and grew up in Roosevelt, New York, a mostly working-class African-American community on Long Island. The value his parents placed on education and his admission to a well-resourced magnet high school near Roosevelt put him on his track to follow his older brother to MIT. So all of y'all are smart. Okay. So he completed his bachelor's and master's in material science and was a Tau Beta Pi scholar. As I said, Karl is coming home to us after also some time in industry at IBM. And the thing that I said to him on Friday, we were at a meeting, and I said it's really nice to be in the room where my executive director is quoted, not only for his research, but also for his contributions to the community. So I'm really proud to present a fine gentleman, an outstanding scholar, and our executive director of the National Society of Black Engineers, Karl W. Reid.
you. Oh my goodness, I don't even have to say anything. Thank you. I wish my wife were here to hear all these because I go home and it's time to change the diapers. But honey, he's 15, But, it's a very much an honor to be here, to be a part of this phenomenal experience. I want to just thank Stacy and the committee Stacy Gardner and the committee for the invitation. I was so humbled back in October to get the invitation or to be considered to be nominated for this position. I wondered if, first of all, the former executive director's name is Karl as well, Karl Mack. And so the first question was this the right Karl being invited? And second, do you really know I'm just that little kid from Roosevelt, Long Island, to be a distinguished lecturer at ASEE? And thirdly, I barely knew what ASEE stood for at the time, because I was just appointed in June prior to that. Now, truth be told, Norman Fortenberry was a year ahead of me at MIT, the executive director of ASEE, and so I always saw him as a big brother. He actually was the NSBE chapter president when I ran for office and became a member of the executive board. And Norman put everyone on the map, put our chapter on the map, in terms of just having a regional presence and building connections with Northeastern University, University of Lowell, Boston University, establishing our zone structure, etc. So I was just so thrilled to be part of it, and I don't know if he had anything to do with this, but thank you, Norman, just in case. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to spend a certain amount of time. I've been given, what, 3 hours for this? I'd like to spend a certain amount of time just giving you some facts and some data based on the work that I've been doing leading up to this job and including this position. And then I want to have a discussion because I don't know about you, but I've been to a lot of conferences, a lot of convenings, a lot of panel discussions, flying all over the country. And as Benjamin Franklin said, at the end of the day, after all is said and done, more is said than done. and I'm an engineer, right? Yes, I live in Washington, and more is said than done. But I want to move us. I want to move the needle. In fact, Stephanie was so gracious in introducing NSBE. We have just completed our strategic plan. And as part of that plan, we're setting a big goal, a 10-year goal, a 2025 goal for the country, not just NSBE, to produce 10,000 African-American engineers per year. And so that's nearly 3 times what the country produces. Now, NSBE accounts for about 25% of all engineering students in the country. We think that that's low and it should be higher. But we know we can't do that alone, but it will require some paradigm shifting for the country. And so we're reaching out to the disciplinary societies, we're reaching out to ASEE, we're reaching out to NACME, the president and CEO of SHIP is here, Richard Morley. Richard and I, raise your hand, Richard. Richard and I have been traveling together in lockstep around the country, along with Karen Hording, the president and CEO of SWE, as well. And then occasionally we see Diane Mack's contrails around the world because it's hard to keep up with Diane, the president of WEPAN. But we've been working together as a coalition to build a major goal for the country in terms of engineering. Because a lot of us have been doing this for a long time, and we haven't seen the needle move considerably. So what I'd like to do here is talk about an ecosystem. I had the privilege of attending an innovation summit with 17 HBCU presidents, provosts, deans of research in Silicon Valley, hosted by the Epicenter, Tom Byers in the Epicenter, who was here, I understand is here and has spoken. And it was just remarkable to see what an ecosystem should look like. So the reason Silicon Valley is so wrought with innovation is because you have the universities that produce the talent, You have the businesses that actually are the byproducts of the talent. And then you have the venture capitalists, the folks with money investing in the talent and in the businesses. And that creates an ecosystem. Anybody from the Boston area? So there's an area of town in the 80s when I came out of school around Route 128. And Route 128 was a technology corridor because it had that ecosystem with the universities and the like. And so I thought about this ecosystem in kind of a systems perspective, and I said, can we apply an ecosystem to education? And largely, education is an ecosystem, but it's not an intentional ecosystem. And so that's what this is all about. It's going to talk really about how do you create this ecosystem. For those of you who are reflective observers, you're going to enjoy this because it's a lot of theory and concepts. And those of you who are active experimenters, you may not enjoy this, but I will provide you with some elements that you can take with you, some nuggets that you can take with you and apply starting tomorrow. So Stephanie did a great job of introducing NSBE. I want to talk about some of the challenges that are associated with our young people and Latino, African American, Native American young people in engineering and in education more broadly. And then I want to talk about some of the factors, some solutions, and then really how do you institutionalize the solution? How do you operationalize it? And then hopefully we'll have a discussion or a QA period afterward. And I'm going to zip through the slides, but just really encourage you to take notes, and we're going to have an active conversation. So we talked about NSBE, and this is really the byproduct of all that we do. It's really what NSBE is about. And it is to increase the number of culturally responsible Black engineers who excel academically, succeed professionally, and positively impact the community. That is our mission. If you've ever attended a NSBE conference, if you attend a summer engineering experience camp with third graders, they stand up and they recite this. It is a pledge of allegiance, but it is a pledge of purpose as well for us. This is sacrosanct for us. And as Stephanie mentioned, we were founded in 1975. We have 31,000 members, a third of whom live outside of the United States. Professionals, which are about 65 members who are NSBE professionals, several of them are here, and as well as officers of our professionals organization. About 40% reside outside of the country, largely in Western Africa. We are student governed, as you mentioned. My boss is that 22-year-old undergraduate student. And I tell you, it's quite remarkable because it is this dual relationship. Not everyone can work for NSBE, where you actually are mentoring, but you're also subject to that individual. And so we talk about leading from behind, or servant leadership, which is what is that delicate dance. We have 15 regional and national conferences. Our annual convention in Anaheim 3 months ago was the second largest ever. 9,300 participants attended that convention. And we're looking for Boston in March to be about 11,000, which will be our largest convention ever. It's quite remarkable to see these beautiful, smart, very well-respected young people walk through the grounds and interact with you. It's so inspirational. One of the things I love about NSBE is that it fosters self-efficacy. And I spend a little bit of time on this because this is going to come through. We build in self-efficacy throughout our programs. We didn't do it intentionally, but the way the structure of NSBE is, from our third grade seat camps that are taught by college students who come and spend 3 weeks with these young people, to our pre-collegiate programs who are advised. We have about 5,000 pre-collegiate students who are part of about 80 NSBE junior chapters around the country. They're advised by adults who inspire and encourage these young people. To our professionals who work with our college students, it's all built in throughout our systems. And so I'm going to come back to that in a bit. So now that we established this, let's talk about the challenge and the challenges. And it's a lot of data, so I hope you're comfortable with data. I know I am, probably a little bit too much. when I joined UNCF, this is an analysis that was done by the Patterson Research Institute. I wanted to get a sense of how big the so-called achievement gap was. And if I can move away from here, because I know some of you are having problems seeing me. As somebody says, you're not a window, but you're a pane. I'm gonna move around a bit. I hope that's okay. I hope that's okay for you too, as well. Hi, Mom. So, the analysis that was done by UNCF's Patterson Research Institute found that there are about, and this is a very difficult analysis because there's no one database in the country that you can point to. So there are a lot of estimates. In fact, the sources we use are about as long as the slide is. But there are 2.6 million white children entering kindergarten every year, roughly, based on the 2010 census. If all of those children make it to high school, which we know is very conservative, because that's not the case, but if all of them make, about 85% will finish high school in 4 years. Now, some will finish high school in 5 years, some will get the GED, but 85%, so about 400,000 will not finish high school. 67% of those will enroll in college right away, based on some estimates. So another about 700,000 won't enroll in college right away. And so there's another, 700,000, that's about 1.1 million who are falling out at some point. They might kind of re-enter, but nevertheless, straight through the pipeline. And then according to recent statistics, 62% six-year graduation rate for white college students. And so at the end of the day, from those 2.6 million kindergartners or ninth graders, about 35% of them will get a college degree. Now, that's not good. I mean, 35% is failing in most schools, right? For Latinos, it gets worse. About 27% of those will get a college degree. And for African Americans, it's even worse, about 16%. So 35%, 27%, 16%, and ladies and gentlemen, this is going to get worse, right? Because if we look at STEM, we start off with about 4 million ninth graders who start every year. According to the National Center for Education Statistics analysis they did of ninth graders who started high school in 2001, about 4 million of those young people, only 4% at the very end graduate in 10 years with a degree in science, technology, and engineering and math. And look at the major drop-offs, right? The major drop-offs are those who are college ready and those who major in STEM. Now, a good friend of mine, Chad Womack at UNCF, did an analysis based in Philadelphia and found the yield for African Americans is about 1% of those who start high school who end up getting a degree in science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, we're not at the ASSE conference, we're at the ASEE conference. And so a subset of those are engineers. And so the numbers are even look even more dismal. So 35%, 27%, 16%, 4%, 1%, we're really not doing well. Now, what are the reasons? And I actually had a whole analysis of some of the reasons, and when I went through the presentation, it took me 20 minutes to walk you through, and I was like, no, let's not do that. The slides are there. I can send the slides to anybody who's interested. But there are a couple of, one slide I do want to point out, and one is readiness or preparation. This slide basically says that if you were in the lowest quartile in your fourth grade math proficiency, you're 62% likely to be in the fourth quartile at the 8th grade level. And your fourth grade math proficiency predicts your early adult income as well. So proficiency at the fourth grade predicts 8th grade proficiency in math and predicts early adult income based on this analysis done in the New York City Department of Education and the NSBE database. So there's a problem with preparation, right, for our kids because only 18% of African American fourth graders are proficient in math. 26% of Latino or Hispanic fourth graders are proficient, and 54% of white children are proficient in math. Now, by the way, 18, 26, 54, it almost looks like the other slides, right? And there's clearly a correlation between 4th grade math proficiency, and that's why one of the things that NSBE wants to do is increase by 1.5% the number of 4th graders who are proficient, who are African American in mathematics in over our 10-year period, in order to get us to that 10,000. But in addition to readiness and preparation, there's another problem, and that's structure. So you want to explain why is it that the young kids, Latino, African American, Native American, et cetera, are doing so poorly? Well, look at this. Changed the equation, did an analysis, and found that 81% of Asian high school students and 71% of white high school students have access to the full range of math and science in their high schools. That's 4 years of math, 4 years of science. But only 57% of African American and 47% of Native American have access. So even if you are a high achiever, you want to take these classes, you may be at a school that doesn't even offer those classes. In fact, Irie Olson at the U.S. Department of Education did an analysis and found that in high minority districts, only 29% have access to calculus. So we have a structural problem as well. We're saying we need more talent, more engineers, but only 29% of high minority districts have access to calculus. So this is a side note. We've got to address this at the policy level as well, this issue, especially as ESEA is being reauthorized. So, hey, the struggle is real, right? I love this picture because of the obvious message. As people are getting it slowly throughout, the obvious message is the struggle is real, but the sub-message is that's a buoyant believer. So Terrell Strayhorn at Ohio State really talks about these African American males who, despite their odds, are really doing well. He calls those buoyant believers. Those high levels of self-efficacy, confidence, and resilience. So, okay, I can't afford earphones, Beats earphones, I'm gonna make my own, right? Despite the challenges, there are a lot of people who are doing well. And so I really launched out in kind of an effort to understand why we were doing well, why I did so well. My parents were, neither of them finished college. My father went to college for 2 years and dropped out. My mother never went to college. I was the third out of four. My sister went to Oberlin and NYU for law school. My brother went to MIT. I went to MIT. My younger brother went to Boston University. We're doing really well. So why did we do well when some who were just as talented, if not more, dropped out in the 9th grade and 10th grade? I had a classmate, a roommate, freshman year, who was private school educated, deep knowledge of chemistry, majoring in chemical engineering. He flamed out his sophomore year. So I really wanted to know, why somebody who's done so well really sits next to someone who doesn't, despite the same context, the same university context. So, you've heard this based on Luke 4:23, physician, heal yourself. I really wanted to understand myself. And so I wanted to understand what success was all about. And so I took a class when I started my doctoral program at Harvard with Pedro Noguera, who taught an urban education class. And Pedro is just really one of those seminal researchers, particularly on boys and urban education and the like. And he had us do an action research. And at the time, I wanted my dissertation to look at what are the factors in the home that translate into school success. Because I was a youth minister, I was involved in ministry and others, and I wanted to be able to stand up at the pulpit and talk to parents about the things that they should do to translate into school success. And so I was on a trustee board of a high school at the time. It was a charter school in the Boston area, the Max School, Max Charter High Schools, one of the early trustees. And they gave me access to 2 students. One was a high-achieving student, very tough to find, African-American, 10th grader. And another was a kind of a mediocre 9th grader. This young man who was just, chronic C student. And parents gave me access to the homes. I could do observations in the home. I did observations in the classroom. I interviewed the parents. I interviewed the kids. I interviewed the teachers, etc. And it was great, all access. It was quite impressive. In this day and age, you probably wouldn't have that, and especially without IRB approval. So I wanted to know what were the beliefs and attitudes and communications, what are the strategies that parents use to translate into success? And I only used 2 students just for contrast, and it was a pilot study, and I didn't publish this at all, but it really did set me off a path that I'll share with you. And so I wanted to just, know kind of what are those practices. So I had 2 students, and I mentioned those 2 students. It turns out there were two things that separated those 2. One was the way they did homework. We spend a lot of time telling students, do your homework, but we don't model the homework. We don't model what it should look like. And there's a lot of research around self-efficacy research that does talk about how important modeling is, even for people to get over their fears, to model successful behavior. David was a very disciplined approach, and these are pseudonyms. David, the high achiever, disciplined approach to homework. He got home. No TV, no radio, no telephone, etc. All by himself. He was a latchkey kid, and he knocked his homework out. Hour and a half, 2 hours on the dining room table. He didn't even have room in his room to do his homework, right? Knocked it out. And his discipline carried into the classroom, what I observed in the classroom, the way he approaches his very workmanlike. Warren was all over the place when he did his homework. Came home, got a bowl of cereal, checked his email, talked to his grandma. Then when he did his homework, he really didn't do his homework, right? I can't believe he was doing his vocabulary work, talking on the phone with music in the background, talking about something else, not even doing his vocabulary. And so what should have been an hour and a half, 2 hours worth of homework took 4 hours. And then after I left the home, he told me he'd watch the movie. It's like 10 o'clock at night, I left, right? To watch the movie. So of course the next day in observation, he was just dragging, right? And so the way he did homework, so I went back to the school and said, you've got to model the homework process. And what the school ended up doing is extending the day. And they started to really have the homework labs in the school, and performance went up. They have really high levels of proficiency at this school. So Alexander R. Aston talks about beliefs are fundamental. And I wanted to dig into this and why the different approach in homework. And so I asked them, why do you spend so much time on homework? And David says, I think I was given homework to reinforce the work that I'm getting, right? That's really the purpose of homework. And so his beliefs about homework translated into his behaviors. Here's what Warren had to say. Teachers gave us homework to work. So his attitude was completely different. So if we want to not just model homework, we have to give the why. I talk about this being the why generation. We talk about Gen Y. No, it's the why generation. We have to give the rationale for why we do things. So I started to really explore this whole beliefs are fundamental, and I stumbled upon the work of Albert Bandura. And Albert Bandura, the exercise of control, says that we all have these beliefs about whether or not we're going to be successful at a task or in a domain. And that influences our behaviors, influences our choices, influences our attitudes, etc. And I'm thinking, from an engineer standpoint, if I can get people to understand where they are in their self-efficacy, then this is a lever for everyone. And what I think I like about it, he had a systems approach. He says that our self-efficacy is a triadic relationship between our internal factors, so who we are, our physical attributes, our motivations, our emotions, those types of things, our behaviors, so what we do, how we translate those internal motivations and behaviors, etc., and the environment, the signals that the environment sends. And so one's behavior is influenced by the environment, but the environment is influenced by behavior as well. So this is a triadic relationship that exists. And it took me a couple of times to read his book and papers to really understand what we were talking about. So let's go back to Warren. And of course, the behavior leads to performance. And most of the time, we focus on this. right? Improving behavior, improving the performance of young people. But we have to really understand all the sense-making that a young person is making in that environment, the signals, the rewards, etc. But let's go back to these young, their comments. And it's very clear that the behaviors were influenced by motivations and the attitudes about the homework. But the school failed to send signals and expectations about the homework until they translated that and created the environment that it caused the students to be much more successful in their homework. And if you look at the notes, Mac School consistently is one of the best high schools in the country. Though, granted, there are only about 220 students there, so it's a big asterisk for the big comprehensive high schools. So, little word about self-efficacy. Confidence in one's ability in a domain or at a task. So this is not self-esteem. So this is you were in that session when I started to ask why they were looking at self-esteem versus self-efficacy. This is not self-esteem. I don't feel good about this. Is not necessarily how I feel about myself. This is really focused on a specific task. The confidence that I can come and give this presentation, for example, influenced my choice to say yes in that case. And praying I didn't have a panic attack, or which I did, but that's okay. Research shows that certain groups, African Americans, women, really adopt what one researcher called, and by the way, I have an annotated bibliography, it's about 10 years old if you really want to reference some of this, a defensive pessimism. So when they take a class, they start a class, they'll say, best I can do is get a C in this class, right? But quietly hope they do better. But publicly, they'll signal to their friends and colleagues, hey, this is about C in this class. Yeah, me too. Yeah. All right, that, right? Whereas white males in this study adopt the posture of strategic optimism, where they say, in this study, hey, I'm going to get an A in this class, and only be satisfied if they fall within a half a grade below that. So strategic optimism versus defensive pessimism. And there are a lot of research studies that show that women and African Americans and other minority groups in certain settings really adopt a defensive posture. Okay? So they're, instead of leaning back, right, Sheryl Sandberg, instead of leaning in, they're leaning back. Okay? It's a different way to approach it. And of course, these beliefs do influence behaviors. So, how it affects the behaviors, as I mentioned, it affects your choices. In fact, David, who was a really high-achieving student, chose not to take the more advanced math class because he had a fixed mindset, which I'm going to talk about momentarily. But it affects your effort, whether or not how much rework you do in math and engineering problems and things like that, whether or not you will discard faulty strategies. Is also influenced by your self-efficacy, level of self-efficacy, your persistence, your resiliency, and your emotional reactions. Vulnerability to stress. So if you have students who are going through a test anxiety, about the test, about the assessment, check them on their self-efficacy. How confident are you? Because if you are confident, you can actually mitigate the level of stress that you deal with. So, what are the four sources, according to Albert Bandera? Mastery experiences. The more success you have, the more confident you are. And that goes without saying, right? That's why Michael Jordan says, give me the ball, right? Because at the end, because he's had success in that past, in that setting. And that success breeds success. But the success has to be within the zone of proximal development, what Vygotsky talks about. The success can't come in a setting that is too challenging or a task that's too challenging, because why? They'll attribute the success to what? Luck, right? And you can't control luck. It's either here or not or gone. And the success can't come when the project is too simple. Second is vicarious experiences. So seeing someone I can identify have the success gives me confidence that I can have success. So this is why it's so important to be role models, to provide role models for young people. But more important than that, if you're in a classroom, first day of class, right? Everybody is doing an appraisal of the teacher. and someone, one of your friends, raises a hand and asks a question, everybody's watching to see how that teacher responds to that question. And if it was okay experience for them, then it's okay for me, right? So that's the role modeling in another way. Verbal judgments. I call this the Home Depot factor. Home Depot used to have a tagline. I wish they didn't get rid of it because I was using it all over the place. It's called, "You can do it, we can help." It's hearing from a trusted source that you can be successful. I remember I was taking multivariable calculus second semester, freshman year, and my instructor, who was also the lecturer for my TA, who was also the lecturer for the course, asked me if I was interested in majoring in math. Ladies and gentlemen, I felt like I had a big S on my chest, right, during that time. And no one could talk to me for a couple of days. Now, ultimately, I did material science, but just hearing that from a trusted source, you're good at math, you should consider majoring in it. This is why a lot of undergraduate students pursue graduate school. Because they're working with a faculty member and they said, have you considered graduate school? And if it wasn't even on their mind, now it is within their radar because of this power. African American students, according to a study that was done at Harvard, were 3 times more likely to name a teacher as the most important adult in their lives than white students. So you can see the power of a teacher in terms of affirming a student, but you can also see the power of taking down that student. And then finally, the physical and emotional states. The states that you kind of come away with. So whereas your anxiety going into a task can actually lower your sense of self-efficacy, your calmness, your ability to approach this task with kind of an even keel emotional state can actually boost it, especially if you were successful in that task. Okay, I've got to move quickly because I've got a lot of material, and hopefully we'll have some time. We will have some time for questions. So, what are the challenges? Anything that transitions from one setting to another, one level to another. So from middle school to high school to middle school to high school to college, all of those things challenge your sense of self-efficacy. So you are confident at one level, you start another level, it's very, very challenging. Lack of skills. Hey, if you don't know how to do calculus, no amount of Home Depoting can improve your calculus, right? So you have to do skills. And I talk about this as important for the learning zone. So you've got to really be explicit about modeling the behaviors, the habits of mind that Ted Sizer talks about in order for students to be successful. Fixed beliefs about intelligence and ability. I talked about that young man who chose not to, even though he was successful, he was an A student, he chose not to go into the more advanced math class because his sense of intelligence was based on, was going to be challenged, and he didn't want it. Smartness was important to him, and he wanted to continue to appear smart instead of a growth mindset where the end is mastery. And how you get there doesn't matter. And so growth mindset, Carol Dweck's work, but even Jeff Howard's work at the Efficacy Institute and others, they've done a lot of work in this area. And engineers actually do have a growth mindset, but engineering students often have a fixed mindset. And perceived social constraints. So if I feel that this environment is not favorable to me as a female or a male or a gay person or whatever it is, right? Then no amount of pushing will help. I'm going to start to put up my hands, and I'll go through a period of learned helplessness. Now, I really wanted to explore a little more about this, and so I did. You could actually have a lot of confidence in certain settings, but if you have a perceived social constraint, it's going to affect your performance. And I started to do other research to understand what are the other factors that are dynamics that play out. And some of you might know about Claude Steele's work on stereotype threat. I experienced it quite a bit, where you're fearful that you are going to confirm a stereotype about your reference group. And he's found that your performance is suppressed. Now, those of you who study neuroscience knows that when you're under stress, your body releases cortisol. When it releases cortisol, it shuts down the executive function of your brain. And so stereotype threat is the psychosocial element that triggers that biological effect. And he's been able to prove this in athletic settings, academic settings, with different groups, etc., that if you can lift the stereotype threat, a person can really thrive and be successful in that environment. We'll talk about how you do that. And then, of course, rumors of inferiority. If you feel that you're going to be stereotyped, then you are going to fear jumping into the arena and engage with a faculty member or engage with an engineering group, an engineering team, etc. And that lack of engagement means a lack of development. And so it increases the gap that exists between your ability and your capability, your performance, and those who do engage. So I wanted to know a little more about that. And anyone see this video recently? Time Magazine. This is a short 5-minute video of the account of some African American boys that talks about the emotional stress of growing up black in America. Just came out. It's by Joe Brewster. Joe Brewster and his wife did a video project, documentary, about 2 years ago called American Promise. And they followed 2 African American boys and their experiences through private schools in New York. It's a phenomenal series to watch. But he did this, and I want you to see a little bit about this. And let's just make sure Stacey works. Okay. It's only 5 minutes.
Racism means basically like a large part of a race feels that they're superior to another race.
You hear?
And so not only do they believe that, but they act on it.
Examples would be in class. Sometimes I'd be the only black kid, and we read a book like, I don't know, Huck Finn, and then there's that uncomfortable moment, the magic word come up, and people look at you like, what's his reaction, things like that.
I was walking home from school with this one white girl, and we just got off the bus, and we were almost home, and there were these group of black kids that just got out of school. She was like, oh, let's cross the street, there's a group of black kids, I don't want to run into them. And so she told me, which I don't even know why she would do that.
So I started like, just to reinforce my wrist, and I had a teacher come up to me and say you should take it off because it looks gang affiliated.
I've been in situations where, I had to cross the street because I didn't want to scare the white lady that was walking.
I would actually get to a point where I would start to count how many times a woman would clutch her bag.
When I was 16, I was leaving my mom's house in my pajamas, which had snowmen on them, with my brother, and we were actually stopped by the police rather aggressively. I've been stopped by the cops on my way between classes. Because we have 2 separate buildings, walking from one building to the other building, as my white students in the same class walked by me.
It's kind of upsetting because we live in a world where my mom has to be afraid when I walk outside from the people that are like meant to protect me. And I don't like when my mother feels like that. I love my mother. I want her to always be happy.
I walk tall, I keep my head up, very, try to be very articulate and polite. And so, of course, I was like, okay, I'm going to be fine because I act a certain way. And of course, that had absolutely nothing to do with it. The way people perceive you, is not up to you. My parents taught me, cops are your friends, you're supposed to, they're here to protect you. But all I'm seeing is the opposite. So how can I not be afraid when I feel like I'm being hunted? When I feel like I'm there to fill a quota?
We are in a so-called free society. And as a black man, we literally don't feel free. We don't know what freedom is.
Every time we're killed, the first thing you see on the news is, criminal record. Or something like that. So from the second the bullet hits us, already we're starting to be dehumanized.
with black people like myself, we don't get as many chances as they do. So you have to be aware and you have to watch out and you can't mess up.
This was an extremely emotionally taxing process for me in terms of coming to terms with maybe the nature of racism in my own life and in this country and in this world. And if you wait until somebody is 12, 13, 14 to put that on them, it can be really difficult.
My dad, he's just like the honest one. He's like, listen, son, like there are things in this world like you kind of have to watch out. He doesn't want me to live in fear, but he wants me to be aware.
I want people to know that I'm perfectly fine and I'm not gonna hurt anybody or do anything bad. I should be judged about like who I am and what kind of person I am.
My parents would tell me, especially my mom, she would tell me, you have to endure, you have to muscle through it, and this is no different. It's part of being a person of color in America.
And there's a certain comfortability associated with that, because if I know that something is inevitable, then I know how to deal with it. Fortunately, I've had parents who have said, this is what you do.
Mom, Dad, I'll be fine because you did a good job raising me. You gave me all the resources and the time, and the blood, sweat, and tears to make me a good man, an honorable man, and the foundation to survive in this country.
I want you to know that I will act in an appropriate manner and do everything that you told me to do because I do love you, and I know that everything you say is not for a reason and not just to talk, and I love you.
And at the end, they just show their parents. They're moving.
Isn't that powerful? So that's available at the New York Times website, and for those of you who are really interested, and you could just encourage you to use that for your cultural competencies and cultural diversity classes and programs as well. And so, a couple of takeaways. The way people perceive you is not up to you, as Bisha said. I wanted to know that I'm perfectly fine, I'm not going to hurt anyone. And as a 10-year-old, that's a third grader. They think about already being aware of the situation. Pedro Noguera and others called it the fourth grade syndrome, when the awareness of whether or not I could be successful in this domain in school really hits a young person. Or awareness of a girl's interest in being an engineer and scientist might run up against cultural norms. They call that the fourth grade syndrome. And so that was played out by little Maddox, 10. If I know that something is inevitable, then I know how to deal with it. And so what he's really asking for at 17 is, let's make this intentional. All right? And we actually spent some time at the Transforming Undergraduate Engineering Education session about making cultural competency very, very explicit for young women, letting them know that they're going to encounter these things, and then really giving them the tools they need to cope and to be successful and navigate these. And then, of course, this whole notion of the stress of realizing that this is an extremely emotional taxing. So if I'm in a situation that I'm still trying to figure out, kind of reconcile my world in this setting, how can I focus on calculus, right? I mean, it's very difficult to sit in the classroom. I remember having my AP teacher threaten to throw the the eraser at me to make me white, right? And so, how can I be successful in this classroom if I hear that from a teacher? So those are the kinds of things that these young people deal with. So while Albert Bandera says there's the triadic relationship between the environment, the internal factors, and the behaviors, he's missing something. He's missing something that's very important. And you're not at your intellectual best when you're under stress. Bottom line, that goes. So what we have to do is think about the ecosystem to raise the stress level, to remove the stress level of our students so that they can thrive in that environment. And I'm going to refer to this a little later as I close, but I'll say it now because a good preacher tells them what you're going to tell them, tells them, and tells them what you told them. So Mark Somerville and David Goldberg in the book A Whole New Engineer talks about the importance of creating an environment where young people can thrive. And not from a top-down perspective, turn to the left, turn to your right, two of you are not going to be here, but turn to your left, turn to your left, turn to your right, you're going to help the other two be successful. It's a whole different orientation. And I remember walking into, and I'm tough on my alma mater, but I remember walking into class on first days of lecture. And before I even get into class, I get the first problem set. Before I get the welcome from my professor, they're handing me the first problem set. What kind of message does that send, you know, to young people? How can I thrive? I'm walking into a class under stress in that setting. So the other thing that they dealt with, these young people realized, is this whole notion of being a regular black person. I asked the young man, Warren, why did he call a student he discovered had A and B not irregular, A's and B's not a regular black person? And he said, well, he got A's and B's. I said, why is he not a regular black person? Well, actually, I didn't really mean to say that. Yes, you did. There's this whole notion in certain settings that you can either be popular or you can be smart. But the vectors are pointing in opposite directions, right? With some sine theta built into it, right? So we've got to think about where these young people are in their racial identity development. And so when I asked Pedro Noguera about this, he recommended I go to read Beverly Tatum's classic book, Why Are All the Black Children Sitting Together in the Classroom, and Other Conversations About Race. Because she actually talks about the racial identity process that occurs. That in elementary school, you see the white children and the black children and Latino children playing together. And then about middle school is when they start to form their groups. And she actually explains the process that occurs that I don't have time to share that with you. So we all represent a bunch of different components of our identity, whether it's our sexual identity, our orientation, our race, our socioeconomic status, all those types of things, all we bring to ourselves. And they're all embedded, as Erickson says, in social, cultural, and historical context. All of that. But depending on where we are, certain elements of our identity become salient. And the rules about that identity really begin to play out. It's the stories we tell ourselves and the world and our attempts to behave accordingly, the social norms that exist. And so I really wanted to know, why was it that some students were successful? And I studied African American males. And I'm going to wind up here on this so that we can open this up to questions. But achievement, I didn't want to know why students failed, but why students like me succeeded. And I was introduced to this whole notion of institutional integration by Tinto's book on leaving college. And he makes the argument that students stay in college, and actually stay in work, by the way, based on two dimensions of integration. The quality of their vertical dimensions, their relationships with faculty, that's the academic integration. In work, it's the quality of their relationship with management. And their peer integration, or their peer cohesion, the quality of the integration in social. And if there's a relationship like that for African American males, what are the factors that moderate that? And I made the argument that academic self-efficacy, the confidence that I have to be successful, does foster the kind of academic integration that's necessary for me to be successful. If I'm confident academically, I'm more likely to approach that faculty member, I'm more likely to ask that question, I'm more likely to go to office hours, I'm more likely to sit in the classroom and sit with a classroom teacher and really kind of understand the material. And then what are the moderators for social integration? Is racial identity attitudes. And there are and by the way, you can take racial identity and plug in gender identity. You can take gender identity, take that out, and plug in sexual orientation identity, ethnic identity, regardless. So don't get caught up in the fact that I just used racial identity here, because that identity influences the kind of integration on campus, and obviously integrates my behavior and integrates the achievement. Here's what I found. Instead of having an indirect effect, it had a direct effect. Academic self-efficacy, confidence that I'd be successful, actually had a direct effect, direct correlation with GPA. And by the way, I was looking for all the guys who had a 3.0 and above who attended 5 Research 1 colleges and universities. Okay, that was my study. Not a big study, but it was over 5 institutions. So I was looking for African American males who were over 3.0, and obviously that makes sense, right? If they're successful, they're more likely to have really high confidence, right? Because mastery is part of one of the sources. But it also had an indirect effect. Those who had high levels of self-efficacy tended to also have great relationships with faculty. Okay, so we talked about this vicarious and this verbal judgment. When a faculty member tells me that I should consider majoring in math and how confident I was, and I blew out the rest of my courses as a result, that's a very powerful connection. So we have to think about ways to facilitate the relationships between faculty and students, especially underrepresented students. And I also found two-way interaction between racial identity, social integration, and achievement. In other words, those who are most mature in their racial identity, what the model calls it internalized. They're comfortable in their own skin, right? They're the ones that are not wearing it on their sleeve. They're very comfortable. I always say Barack Obama is an internalized African American because he's the first black president, and then he goes ahead and puts a basketball court in the White House. Very comfortable. Right? Very comfortable on his own. That's an internalized, racial identity, right? And so those who were internalized, also who were very integrated in the campus, had the highest GPAs. Okay, in the study, and there's the study is published in one of the journals, and I have the reference in the notes. But I also found that those who had certain levels of racial identity had positive and negative relationships with faculty. So there was a period in my college experience when I only joined everything with the word black in it, right? It's called immersion. And I just needed to separate myself to really figure out who I was. And so Black Student Union, Black Christian Fellowship, Black Gospel, it was gospel choir, but it was all black folks. And if it didn't have black in it, it had chocolate in it. So I lived in Chocolate City, right? So I was there, but I emerged out of that and really began to build connections across racial and ethnic groups. But it turns out those who had that immersion attitude have very poor relationships with faculty, did very poorly academically. And so what this suggests is that we've got to think about ways to foster the identity development of students. And I'll get to how we do that. But first of all, so there's a learning dimension, right? Remember I said you can't build self-efficacy without skills? And so their students have to really know how to learn, okay? Habits of mind. Second, the relational dimension. Fostering the kind of intentional relationship between faculty and staff and peers in study groups, and showing students how to use study groups well. The identity dimension, helping students really understand who they are, especially as they're coming into college or planning to go to college. And then, of course, the motivational dimension, making sure they're making the proper attributions about their success and failure. Attributions that empower them and not diminish their confidence. So some students, their racial ethnic makeup influence their confidence in their abilities and depending on the context. Okay, so let me finish up. So what's this modified ecosystem? What Albert Bandera says, yes, behaviors, motivation, or internal factors in environment all matter, but there's another dimension there. And we have to take into consideration identity. Sometimes I give this talk and I basically borrow NPR's signature program, All Things Considered. Let's consider race as part of this discussion. And those of you who don't have this experience, it really, for some people, for some African American, for some Latino, for some women, for some LGBT students, they're not ready to engage.
So you can't always assume that someone is willing and ready to do that. And so part of the recommendations is really understand, learn about racial identity and gender identity and ethnic identity theory, and be able to test where somebody is in the process, and then engage when they're ready to be engaged. So these are the things that matter. I summarized them already, so I'm not going to go through that. And let me just finish up with how to operationalize this. And this is that ecosystem that I talked about, which is a system that has interconnecting parts and making sure everything is together. And ecosystems have been used in the biosphere, but actually now being used in industry as well, where they're bringing together universities, capital, et cetera. I've talked to Northrop Grumman about the way they've kind of interacted with a number of different entities to foster the kind of innovation that you're seeing there at that corporation. So how do we do this? Operationalize it. We have to, first of all, engineer the environment. Structure curricula to demonstrate progressive mastery so that students can see progress being made. Remember that mastery experience. The more they have success, the more confident they are in the willingness to take on greater challenges. Facilitate out-of-class time with teachers and faculty. Don't assume students will do that. I grew up in a West Indian home. We didn't approach adults. That's just not what we do. We were to be heard, but to be seen but not heard in the family. Whereas some who grew up in more of a traditional Jewish tradition, it's very comfortable to engage and sit around the table and have a discourse. And so walking in a school environment, it's very comfortable for this. So sometimes we have to engineer the facilitation. Assess expectations and unconscious biases. We all have them, ladies and gentlemen. And so most people in this room say, I'm not a racist. Most people, all people in this room say, I'm not a racist. But if you check your biases, you might find that you favor one group over the other. There's been studies that show that if you have a racial bias, teachers have a racial bias who grade African American children more harshly than white children. So all those teachers would say, I'm not racist, right? But they've done some studies that find that if they have a bias, they'll behave in a different way. Educate adult staff about racial, ethnic, sexual identity development. There's a lot of good research out there that's not deep. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I used to do all this with my freshman seminar. So the guys would actually read about Karl Reid's work, read about unconscious biases, read about identity development, etc. But institutions that are really thoughtful, some faculty faculty search groups really insist that the faculty go through unconscious or implicit bias training as well. Examine implicit and explicit rewards and penalties in the class. Structure study groups, so don't leave it to the students, especially as they're transitioning from high school to college. Structure those study groups so that the students who are less comfortable or struggling with their own identity, you do the hard work for them. And then diagnose and teach to diverse learning styles. So that's how you engineer the environment. The others are shorter, ladies and gentlemen. Behaviors. Model and teach the strategies that work. Don't assume anything. I had a student who's ultimately graduated from Harvard University, was in my summer program, the Mike's program. He never learned how to take notes in class. Never did. Just straight A student, never learned how to do that. And we only discovered him week 5 or 6 in the program, when his grades really started to tank. But modeling those types of things. Internal motivation. Help students make empowering attributions. When they have success, help them attribute the success to their effort, not just their ability. And if they fail, make sure they attribute their failure not to ability, but to lack of effort, or as Jeff Howard calls it, effective effort. Foster growth mindsets. And the way I do it with my students when I did this freshman seminar, actually they read Carol's first chapter of growth mindset. And let's talk about this, the difference.
And then finally, foster positive identity development, integrate identity topics into curriculum. We had a bridge program at MIT called Interface, and we redesigned the writing component, and we called it Reading and Writing About Identity. So the students actually had to read material about their culture and their communities and share among themselves. It was a phenomenal change in the way we did things. Create space for identity safety. Some students do need to separate, like I did, and join all the groups that had the word BLACK in it. They need to separate, but make sure that they can foster and come through a process, come out of that, and facilitate cross-cultural interactions when they do come out. And that actually can facilitate the process of coming out of this into that internalized identity. And help students discover their element. Ken Robinson had a phenomenal Sir Ken Robinson, phenomenal TED Talk called The Element. I actually bought his books, read his books, and then passed it out to the students. The element is when your passion and your confidence come together. I'm in my element now as NSBE Executive Director. It's just like, wow, I've worked all my life for this. And many of you are in your element. The earlier our students can discover that element, there's almost like a sense of purpose that arises, that, and they become much more intrinsically motivated to do things. And so helping them discover what interests them, what excites them, what they're passionate about, and then what they're good at, and bringing that together, you won't have to work as hard as an educator. So this is a copy of the syllabus of my freshman seminar I did for freshmen. This is a residence-based freshman seminar for students in an ethnically themed living group. And I actually started with the students coming up with an achievement contract, which is, you know, they read the pact, the book about the three doctors who committed to supporting each other to become doctors, and they formed their own contract for 4 years at MIT. And things like, we're going to graduate with a 4.5 out of 5.0 collectively. It had a lot of academic things. We're not going to miss class. To it had other things like no diseases and no babies, right? This is the learning zone, right? Learning zone. Racial identity, stereotype, cultural, and achievement. That's the motivation zone. And then they had some behavioral zone, the learning zone again, preparing for finals and setting goals. And then I moved into the relational zone again, history of affirmative action, assault on affirmative action, situational leadership, and actually started to have meetings with senior administration officials. So this is why NSBE works, and this is why groups like it, like SWE on campuses work. And this is why the seminar works, because it really incorporates all of this, and at the end of the day, these young people have a sense of I can, and they develop that. Plug into this book, A Whole New Engineer. Motivation is highly correlated with persistence and intention to complete the engineering degree. And so again, you see elements of the ecosystem in their writing. David Goldberg's and Mark Somerville's writing at Olin College and High Foundry at University of Illinois. They actually installed motivation, joy, courage as part of the pillars of their education system. And then finally, they ended with this. Mastery is experience in an environment where creativity is encouraged, where trying new things is seen as an opportunity to get better. And that's really what we want to get to. This is the holy grail. This notion that we can get better, we can have mastery of these experiences, and you do that by creating an ecosystem. So, thank you. About 22 minutes to take questions and to have a discussion and to review. That's okay too. I just will leave.
Do you ever think that self-efficacy can be separate from habit and can be independent? Because there would be students that are highly motivated and like really set goals, and they don't have that habit, but they're students that have that really disciplined habit, but then also succeed. Do you think that they should be together, or can be independent?
can self-efficacy be separated from habit? And you can actually get in the habit of success without being confident about your success. The problem is when you experience more challenging work or more challenging domains, then the habits that you might have established at one level may not translate. And so self-efficacy is so very important because it gives you the activation energy to learn new strategies to be successful in the next domain. You know, I was really good in high school. And my first physical chemistry exam was, I got a 38. And when I went back, and I actually wrote about it in our magazine. By the way, we have copies of the NSBE magazine, both the Bridge magazine for high school, middle and high school students, and for the collegiate students, and then our annual report that just kind of gives an overview of some of our programs here. I only have 10 copies of each because I didn't want to carry a bunch, but we can make it available to you. But one of the things that you really have to get to the point where you're not only good at something at one level, but you have confidence that you can build on that work. And that's the nature of engineering, right? It's the nature of engineering. It could be a habit of developing a widget, but that goes from being an engineer to a technician. I had a question over here, and then
So you talked about the fourth grade experience, the syndrome.
Right.
And so I have two questions. One is I'm curious about what do you think the approach would be to reverse that, to change that and impact in a positive way? And then talk about the access to courses in high school. What are your thoughts on providing technology? What is your thought on how do we provide access to those courses in high school that students don't have access to, calculus, physics, and those kinds of things, to level that playing field?
Yeah. So the fourth grade syndrome, the more students, you know, middle school, let me just talk about middle school for a second. My pastor used to call it when the hormones move.
Yes.
You know, and so everything gets clouded in that situation. And so it's so very important. It's almost like this cocoon experience, and you come out really in 10th, 11th grade as a new individual, new adult. And so it's very key to make sure that the inputs are right and the environment there. So having success early really helps put somebody on a trajectory. You know, I had the opportunity to go to Mission Control recently and met Jean France. Yes, thank you. And I just kind of was struck by how so much of this was about setting a trajectory and then hoping for the best. You know, with some minor corrections, but that was it. And I think that's part of it. Having early success. So our summer engineering experience for kids, our SEED program, we have 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. Thank you, Northrop Grumman, and some of the others who are here who sponsor that program. This year we'll have 17 camps in 16 cities, near 5,000 students. Now that scratches the surface of the numbers that we really need. So how do we expand that and how do we extend that? We're thinking about franchising the SEED model. So boys and girls clubs and YMCAs, et cetera, that's one. But using technology is key. So we're piloting a program with Alex, the math program. We're piloting that program with the hope that we can leverage, scale that across the SEED communities so that parents are working with their kids on this math expert system. But success is so key. And identity. So these young people can identify with being an engineer. My father had me say Massachusetts Institute of Technology when I was 3 years old. and when I was 5 years old, because I had a love for trains, he said, well, engineers drive trains. I said, I'm going to be an engineer. And so, you know, he kind of modified that later, but so I was on a path at 5. So that's what, you know, that moonshot type of thing is so very important. But yeah, technology, you've got to leverage that. Yes?
I
what kills some of my students is that they're working while they're being an engineering student. So they might have one of their dorm mates or somebody they know is working, but it's in a non-engineering major. That they could do, but if they're working and they're doing engineering, they don't have time for study groups, and they don't have the wherewithal, and also sometimes they come with weaker backgrounds, so they have to put in an extra effort, and they're working, so it's, you know, the two, it's like a double whammy, and it seems like that could be fixed by just giving scholarships.
Yeah, in fact, UNCF, one of the things that we did when I was there, the head of the research division, UNCF awards $100 million in scholarships a year. The Gates Millennium Scholars is one of them, but we had 400 different scholarship funds. We wanted to know how much is enough. And so we did a regression analysis and found that $5,000 awarded to a freshman African-American student, because most of those students, not all, but most of them are African-American, $5,000 increased the likelihood that he or she will graduate by 8 percentage points, right? So to your point, we empirically proved that, and actually there was a publication called Better Futures as part of that analysis. And so money is key, and what NSBE is trying to do is we're trying to increase the number of scholarships. We're awarding 1 million this year. We're looking to increase those, but putting them in touch with it. So money is very key. The other is there is a threshold for work. The more students can work on campus, increase the likelihood that they will be engaged on campus. And so, are there opportunities for research work on campus, to work alongside faculty? That will knock off a few of these things, so that faculty are providing the kind of guidance and support. There may be some research dollars to relieve them financially. They're learning a new discipline. That's great. That is so valuable. At MIT, and of course it's MIT, so you put an asterisk on that, 80% of the students get some research experience during the course of their undergraduate years. And a lot of colleges are doing that. And it doesn't take a lot. It really doesn't take a lot. But that's the way I would do it. Just try to facilitate that kind of program. NSF, there are other sources that can facilitate that. But working is okay because you understand they have to work, but if it's on campus and it's aligned with the values of the campus, it's really mutually beneficial. Yes? I'll make my answers shorter.
So to develop an ecosystem, it takes the university or even a department to embrace that. What advice would you have to help actually develop an ecosystem that would be friendly for?
Yeah, what's advice to develop an ecosystem at university? So you hear about Harvey Mudd a couple of days ago, and the president there has really developed that type of system. Olin College has done, University of Illinois has done it within the engineering department. It does require leadership. And my thinking, so you see where I'm dressed, this is my IBM training, right? Dark suit, white shirt. One of the things I learned in IBM is understand what the customer wants, and then fashion the solutions accordingly. So, faculty or universities want successful students who go off and do great things so that they can make the donation, right? And if they have a 30% graduation rate, and or 30% of the students who start leave and go with no offense taken, but major in something else where they can't get a job, it's much more difficult. So trying to find out ways to do that. And I actually just bring these kind of data. I mean, just let the data speak for institutions that have been successful. And but it has to, unless somebody tells me wrong, it has to have some commitment somewhere in the institution. You know, you can't all have a Freeman Hrabowski at UMBC, right? But you can have a Chuck Vest at MIT. You can have a Purdue. And you can have, there are leaders. That's the way to do it. And yes, if you had an answer?
No, do I have some response? Okay. I spent 22 years at the U.S. Naval Academy. The last 4 years, which I was department chair. And understanding diversity for me was not so important. I had to get my faculty to understand diversity. So So we Red Cross those books.
I
bought it for them. I said, you guys are going to read this. And so one of my faculty members became the director of engineering at Clemson. And the question was asked in the interview, tell me about diversity. He said, you need to read this book. Yeah. So we need to report this idea around.
Yeah. And I did an article in the MIT faculty newsletter that said why diversity matters. And again, I put it in terms of faculty. We know it improves classroom interaction, improves the quality of research, et cetera. And, you know, let the data speak. And some will come alongside and support it, and some won't. You know, if somebody says it's a distribution curve, right? 10% will never change. All right? They'll never change. 10% are early adopters. They're already on board. And then the 80% you can work on. But you really do have to find a champion like you. Yes.
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much. I think the data you presented is very useful. So talking about data, I even work in Philadelphia where the demographics is slightly different than the ones you saw here. Well, the African American students are actually the majority of the students perhaps in elementary school. And we sort of have the issue of like reporting things that perhaps are discriminatory behavior and everything else. From your experience as an SB, you quoted Home Depot, and I'm going to quote another thing I like a lot. TSA says, if you see something, say something. And I love this one. I love the engagement. You know? So from your experience as an SB, maybe unpublished, undocumented data, how many reports do you get? Maybe it's unofficial, maybe it's people don't want to document this information, of discriminated behavior in a college level and high school level. And based on that, masters, talking about structure and systems, talking about race, perhaps, because the problem in America is very different in those components. If you remove the racial component, and you talk about, as the gentleman just mentioned here, the faculty training. As a faculty myself, I was never really trained out of the online system at the university. Nobody told me, and actually I don't think it's a bad thing that nobody told me, that I have to be special with special groups. Because I'm not special, I think, by my mother and father. You know, treat everybody the same way. But talking about a structural problem now, because they exist somewhere, even the white or the Latino students now, how do you think the faculty or the teachers could be better prepared to actually deal with this issue? So first, reporting the issue. Second, structure.
Yeah, I think that the reporting issue is anecdotal, unfortunately. I mean, you know, you hear these stories across the country about situations, but actually as executive director, maybe the NSBE will give me sense. I actually hear more positive stories. Where I go, the president is on board, and they're attending the NSBE events, et cetera. For the NSBE Junior, many of the high school level programs are actually in community groups. They may or may not be in the schools. And when they are in the schools, there's already a favorable environment in that to support that. So I'm actually have kind of a limited range of the kind of things that I see. Your second question about the structural changes. So we had a long talk about this with who was in the TUEE section. Adrian here, a couple of others were here. We had a long talk about this. And how do you change culture? And I just look at some examples of success. You know, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, when Freeman Hrabowski was the provost, he started the Meyerhoff Scholars Program. 75 students a year would come in, they would get all this support, and they would really demonstrate success. And after a while, the faculty members would come up to those black students and say, are you on the basketball team? Like they did in my high school. And I would say, no, I'm on the tennis team. Because I got cut from that. But over time, it changed the culture, its success. So the question is, do you focus on the top down or the bottom up? And what we decided was both, right? You really have to deal with it from an institutional standpoint of culture change, as well as making sure that the students that you have so much success that it really does. Remember the triadic relationship? It really does start to change the environment. And you've got to do this in the long term. Because really, culture change comes from norms, values, attitudes, etc. That's really when it changes.
If I might comment.
So one more structural way to operationalize that, new teacher orientation. And new faculty orientation. That's what we started to do, because it's very difficult to change, you know, the spots on leopards, shepherds, whatever. but you really start with new faculty, new teachers.
The comment is, as you said, what is the cast and what is the product? If we focus a lot on the product, which is the student at university level, or teaching level, and high school level, then emphasis is given on changing student habits, changing student psychology, rising, lifting, as you said, the stress. But I believe that if the product actually is formed by the process, I think that the people who make the process, I think is equally important in the equation, or maybe more important, into forming the structure of how the product is. So, in my opinion, again, emphasis is given a lot into this expectation of things have to happen for the student. And whether black or Latino, or minority in general, female even, in engineering, you know, female is a very good thing. I think that's perhaps a very strong part of the problem, but the process is that faculty and teachers, in my opinion, they don't get perhaps what they need.
Right.
So
yeah, and it's just a matter of understanding what's important to them and framing it in their way, the way that's important. The caliber of the classroom really improves if we give attention to these issues, and then showing some positive success. And that's, yeah, it's a challenge. It is a challenge. Yes. I guess 1, 2, 3, and that's it. Right?
So I teach in the writing program at NSBE, and there's a belief there that if you got in, you passed the biggest hurdle, and you're done. This is great. You know, you sort of think. And I see a lot of people that I work with and faculty very open to students coming to them to either ask for help or ask for resources, but there's not necessarily sort of going out to them to like present resources or invite them to engage in opportunities. So I'm just wondering, in terms of your point about operationalizing some of your recommendations, what would it mean for teaching staff to sort of like make things available to students, as opposed to waiting for students to come to them and ask them for it?
I remember, you know, if there's an NSBE chapter and a SWE chapter, SHIP chapter on campus, they actually do have these faculty mixers. And for a lot of students, there's a reluctance to approach faculty, especially if they're not performing well academically. And so you really do have to send a signal that it's safe. It's a safe environment to do that. And so we're looking for opportunities to build those kind of connections outside of the classroom is so very key. Now, how do you inspire faculty to do that? You know, at the MAC school, and this is a little easier, we actually fired teachers who wouldn't reach out to families. And that was just bottom line. You just can't do that, of course, at a university level. But you do have to find some champions who are willing to do that and move them along. It's tough, but understand, again, back to sales 101, what does the customer want? In this case, the faculty customer. It's just whatever they want, and then frame it in this way that these are the techniques that are important for you to be successful as a faculty member. But that it's a tough challenge. I do admit that. You just have to find the champions like you. Okay. Yes.
So one of the ways that we think about addressing the stereotype threat is to try to cluster students, like students together, so that they feel like they've got common community. I wonder what your thoughts are about that, whether that just delays the inevitable. At some point, they are going to have to address outside. But what do you think about trying to group students together so as to try to address them?
I think that if it's possible, it should be a choice for students. So that if they have an option, they should do it. Because everybody's on a different stage in their racial identity spectrum. And some students are in what they call a pre-encounter phase, where race is not salient to them. and then ultimately they have an experience and they say, oh wait, you know. But I have a son who's a sophomore, just finished his sophomore year at Harvard. Race is not salient to him. I mean, he's just not. He's on the baseball team. He's on the, you know. So if I tried to cluster him, it probably wouldn't work. Whereas my daughter, that was when she's 4 years older. That was important to her. So create opportunities for them to do that intentionally by the way where they are is the best way to do it. Not necessarily assume that because you're in this group, forcing them to do that. I think this is the last. No, I think he had his hand up. I'm sorry.
What's your sense on how kids and young adults are interacting with each other today?
At what level?
In the school environment, high school or college.
It's a great question. I think it's a bifurcated model. So the affluent children grown up with their parents as their friends. And so they're very comfortable interacting. The helicopter parents, the tiger moms, etc. It's it. The students who are not affluent, it's still a different relationship. And so it really is, it depends on the demographic of the group. I think that this whole parents are friends is a problem. I had a parent who told me not only am I a helicopter parent, I'm an Apache helicopter parent. Okay. So I think there is a problem, and for the student to come to a faculty member and say, I fell asleep in your class, but I'm not really. Should I be worried? Is this stuff going to be on the test?
But I'm curious with each other, peers, students as peers.
Again, bifurcated, right? A group interaction is fostered at a lot of schools, and schools coming up to K-12, we're seeing a lot of that is built in. But for minority students, not the case, because we've had to hide how smart we are for so long that we've never really been given the tools to work in a group. And so it really has to be engineered.
Please join me in thanking our